Dr. Quinn Marshall stood at the entrance of Seattle's renowned Lux Haven, the warmth of the chandeliers spilling across the snow-dusted street, drawing a sharp contrast between the opulence of the restaurant and the crisp, biting January air. Her emerald green dress clung to her silhouette like a second skin, the silk fabric reflecting the faint moonlight. Her long, straight black hair cascaded down her back in perfect symmetry, and her deep brown eyes gleamed with an unwavering determination. At 32, Quinn had built her career with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, sharp, exacting, and deeply committed to healing. She had earned her place in a world that often sought to question her worth. Tonight, however, she wasn't walking into an operating room or a conference hall filled with colleagues who admired her brilliance. Tonight, she was stepping into an arena far more personal, more challenging, the dinner with her boyfriend's family. And from the moment she entered the grand dining room of Lux Haven, Quinn felt the weight of judgment pressing in on her from all sides. The glittering crystal chandeliers above, the polished marble floors, the air thick with the scent of truffle and rosemary. None of it could drown out the silent scrutiny that filled the space. Will Harper, her boyfriend, a 34-year-old tech entrepreneur whose rise had brought him into Seattle's elite circles, led her to their reserved table near a window, the Seattle skyline glittering beyond it. He was a kind man, and Quinn had often wondered how someone as seemingly perfect as him could have such a hard time understanding the struggles she faced daily. As they made their way across the restaurant, she caught sight of his mother, Evelyn Harper, and his sister, Rachel Harper. Both women sat at the table, their eyes immediately scanning Quinn. Evelyn's icy blue gaze lingered far too long, and Rachel's lips twisted into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. Evelyn, ever polished, greeted her with a handshake that barely brushed Quinn's hand, as if afraid that even a touch could somehow soil her. Dr. Marshall, Evelyn's voice was smooth, but her words carried an edge that Quinn could feel. Will has told us quite a lot about you. A doctor, how unexpected. There was a pause before the word unexpected hung in the air, like an invisible barb aimed directly at Quinn's presence in the room. Rachel leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the soft light from the chandeliers, her smile syrupy sweet, but carrying a venomous edge. General practitioner, she mused, as though she were savoring the phrase. I thought it was specialists who made it big. But I guess you got lucky, right? With some of your wealthy patients. Her voice dripped with sarcasm, and Quinn could feel the insult beneath the surface. The words stung, but she refused to let them show. She had faced worse in the world of medicine, where her skills had always been questioned simply because of her race, her gender. But this was different. This was the family of the man she loved, and the sting was sharper. Quinn's smile never wavered, her eyes locking with Rachel's for a beat longer than was comfortable. I'm proud of my work, she said, her voice steady. Helping people, whether they're from the streets of Brooklyn or the penthouses of Seattle, that's what I do. Every life is important. The response was a shield, one she had perfected over the years. She had been raised by parents who had worked tirelessly to give her the opportunities she had now. Her father, a bus driver, and her mother, a nurse, had instilled in her a deep work ethic. They taught her to stand tall in the face of adversity, to hold her head high even when the world tried to push her down. Quinn had spent years fighting to prove her worth, to show that her brilliance wasn't a fluke, but a result of hard work and dedication. But Evelyn wasn't done. Brooklyn, was it? She asked, her words cold as though she were testing the very fabric of Quinn's being. Must be a far cry from this, she added, sweeping a hand across the gleaming restaurant, as though Quinn's roots were somehow beneath her. But then again, we all have to make do with what we have. Quinn's breath hitched, but she quickly masked it, her composure a perfect facade. I'm proud of where I come from, she said, her voice unwavering, her eyes not leaving Evelyn's for even a second. My parents worked hard to give me a chance at something more. I earned my place here tonight, just like I earned everything else. She could feel Will's presence at her side, his hand resting gently on her back, but his attention was divided, his eyes already drifting toward a business associate across the room. The weight of his absence, in both his physical attention and emotional support, settled like a heavy stone in Quinn's chest. This wasn't the first time he had faltered in this way, allowing his family's prejudices to cloud his judgment. But tonight, as the family's jabs became more personal, it was clear that this wasn't just a small fracture in their relationship. This was a deep rift that was widening with every word. The conversation dragged on, each insult more subtle than the last. Rachel leaned forward, her lips curling into another smile, but it was devoid of warmth. A general practitioner, huh? She mused, her voice dripping with condescension. That's bold. But I guess you don't need to be a specialist when you have access to all the right people. Her words were meant to undermine her, to suggest that Quinn's success was built on connections rather than her own merit. Will, oblivious to the tension building between his family and Quinn, laughed with someone at the bar, his attention fully absorbed by the conversation. Quinn's heart clenched. She had always known that this moment would come, the moment when her place in Will's world would be questioned. It had always felt like she had to prove herself, not only to his family, but to him as well. It was exhausting, and it was wearing her down. The dinner continued, the conversation flowing around Quinn like a distant hum, but she was no longer listening. She had grown numb to the insults, to the constant need to prove herself in a room that had already made up its mind about her. The weight of Evelyn's icy stares and Rachel's smirking comments weighed heavy, but Quinn refused to let them break her. She had built her life on resilience, on the understanding that her value was not defined by others, but by the work she put in, the lives she saved, the difference she made in the world. Still, as the night wore on, Quinn felt something inside her shifting. She had been patient with Will, patient with his family, but tonight she realized the patience was running out. She had done everything right. She had risen above the prejudice, had deflected their barbs with grace and poise, but she couldn't keep fighting this battle alone, and the man she loved had just let her down once again. Quinn looked at Will, who was still distracted by his conversation, and for the first time, she wondered whether the love she had given him, the patience, the understanding, was enough. Was it worth the toll it was taking on her? Was it worth being overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed by the very people who should have been her support system? The dinner continued, but Quinn was no longer just a participant. She was a spectator, observing her own life unravel before her eyes. As the evening dragged on, Quinn's thoughts began to shift from the gathering at the table to the reality that was slowly unfolding in front of her. Every word that Rachel spoke, every icy look from Evelyn, felt like a thorn digging deeper into her skin. But it wasn't just the discomfort of being scrutinized, it was the realization that Will, the person she had given her heart to, seemed blind to the depth of what was happening. She had been patient, she had been understanding, but tonight she could no longer ignore the nagging thought that perhaps, just perhaps, her love for him wasn't enough to fix the cracks in their relationship. Her gaze lingered on Will, still engrossed in conversation with someone at the bar, his laughter ringing out, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing across the table. His smile, once a comforting beacon of warmth, now felt distant, almost foreign. Quinn had always believed that love, at its core, was about standing together, about showing up for one another, even when things got tough. But in this moment, she felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. She was here, at this beautiful restaurant, dressed to impress, trying to win over a family that already saw her as an outsider. And Will? He was standing off to the side, oblivious to the quiet war that was being waged right in front of him. Quinn's fingers tightened around her napkin as the tension at the table grew thicker. Rachel's voice, dripping with passive-aggressive remarks, continued to jab at her. "So, how does it feel, Quinn?" she asked, her smile like a blade. "You're a doctor, but you're not exactly what I would call the ideal match for someone like Will. I mean, look at his world. Does it fit with yours?" The insult landed with a quiet thud. Quinn's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. She had learned over the years that responding to every taunt, every attempt at belittling her, only gave the other person power. But as Rachel continued her litany of dismissive comments, Quinn's patience started to fray. These were not just empty words, they were aimed at her very identity, at her accomplishments, and at everything she had fought for. The woman who had clawed her way through medical school, who had saved lives, who had fought every day to prove that her brilliance was not a gift, but the product of her own hard work, was being reduced to nothing more than a lucky woman who had managed to catch the eye of a wealthy man. Evelyn chimed in again, her voice smooth but with a deliberate edge. "Well, you're certainly ambitious, aren't you, Doctor?" "Marshall?" Her words were like ice slicing through the air. "But ambition alone doesn't make you fit for a world like this." She glanced pointedly at the plush surroundings of the restaurant, as if to remind Quinn of where she didn't belong. "Maybe you should consider the consequences of your choices." The jab stung, but Quinn didn't flinch. She had heard it all before. The whispered doubts, the sideways glances, the assumptions that her success had been handed to her. But none of it mattered. Not now, not in this moment. She could feel the weight of Evelyn's gaze upon her. But Quinn was resolute. She was a doctor, a healer. She had saved countless lives. Her worth was not defined by a dinner table full of prejudice or by a family who couldn't see beyond their own narrow worldview. It was defined by the difference she made in the world, by the lives she touched, by the hearts she healed. Will's absence in this moment was a weight she couldn't ignore any longer. She had fought for their relationship, fought to build something real. But love wasn't a one-way street. It required reciprocity, support, and understanding. Will had promised her that he would stand by her, yet tonight he had been absent in the most critical of moments. The realization hit her like a wave. Will's family wasn't the only barrier in their relationship. He was too. As the evening wore on, Quinn's mind raced. She loved him, truly, but was love enough to keep going when it felt like she was fighting this battle alone? The answer seemed to linger in the air, unanswered, like the soft hum of the string quartet that continued to play in the background. There was no answer, not yet. Quinn's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden commotion at the table. A loud crash echoed through the restaurant. Will, still standing at the bar, suddenly staggered, clutching his chest, his face contorted in pain, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Will!" Evelyn's voice rang out in panic as she scrambled to her feet, her hand reaching for him. But Will's body buckled, and he collapsed to the ground with a sickening thud. The entire restaurant fell silent in an instant. The guests, once murmuring and laughing, now froze, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Quinn's heart raced. Her medical training kicked in without hesitation. She knew what had to be done. She sprang into action, pushing past the stunned guests, her dress trailing behind her as she knelt beside Will's body. His eyes were wide with fear, his face pale, and his chest was struggling for breath. Quinn's pulse quickened, but her hands were steady as she checked for a pulse. It was faint, erratic. "Call 911," she shouted, her voice cutting through the panic that had erupted around her. "He's having a stroke. We need an ambulance now." Her mind worked quickly, processing every step as she moved to stabilize him. She positioned his body, tilting his head to clear his airway, her fingers pressing down on his chest in rhythmic compressions. She spoke to him in a calm, authoritative voice, urging him to stay with her, to hold on. For a moment, the room was chaos. People were scrambling, some pulling out their phones, others frozen in fear. But Quinn's focus never wavered. This wasn't about her relationship with Will, his family's judgment, or the cruel words that had been spoken. This was about saving a life, and that was what she did best. She worked quickly, her hands steady as she directed the staff, telling them to retrieve aspirin from the kitchen, to fetch any medical supplies they could find. Every second felt like an eternity. The sound of her heartbeat pulsed in her ears as she continued to administer life-saving care, her mind calculating every movement, every breath. "Stay with me, Will," she whispered, though he was barely conscious, his eyes unfocused. She could feel the tension building in the room, the uncertainty palpable, but she couldn't afford to let it break her focus. Her training, her experience, everything she had learned over the years had led her to this moment. The sirens grew louder in the distance, the promise of help drawing nearer. Quinn's mind raced through the steps she had to take, mentally preparing the paramedics for what they would find when they arrived. She could already hear their footsteps pounding against the marble floors as they rushed toward her. The chaos around her felt distant now, and all she could focus on was the man lying before her, his life hanging in the balance. The paramedics burst through the doors like a surge of order, their boots echoing against the marble floors. The restaurant, which had once been a place of luxury and elegance, now felt like a battlefield. The chaos that had filled the air moments ago was replaced with the controlled precision of the medical team. Quinn stepped back, her body still trembling with the adrenaline that had fueled her every move. She had done what she could, but now it was time to let the professionals take over. She rose to her feet, her heart still pounding, her breath still shallow. As the paramedics took over, Quinn stepped aside, watching as they worked to stabilize Will. The weight of the moment settled on her chest, a mixture of relief and fear. He was alive, for now. But how long would it last? And how much of him would be left after this? Evelyn and Rachel, who had been standing frozen in shock just moments before, now surged forward. Their expressions were a mixture of disbelief, panic, and something else. Something Quinn could only identify as shame. It was as if they were seeing Will's collapse as a consequence of their actions, as if their cruelty toward Quinn had led to this moment. Evelyn, her pearl necklace now askew, reached out to touch Will's shoulder, her fingers trembling. Rachel, her sharp features softened by fear, looked to Quinn with wide, terrified eyes. Quinn didn't move. She had already done her part, and her involvement here was over. She glanced down at her dress, now stained with the weight of the evening's emotions. The rich emerald green had lost its shine, just like the facade of civility Evelyn and Rachel had put on earlier. She didn't need their apologies. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. The paramedics, having stabilized Will enough to transport him, carefully loaded him onto the stretcher. Quinn stepped back, her mind still sharp, processing everything at lightning speed. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with the unspoken words that would never be said. She had saved Will's life, but the price of doing so had been high. The betrayal she felt from him and his family was more than just a sting. It was a wound that would take time to heal, if it ever would. As the paramedics wheeled Will toward the door, Quinn's gaze swept over the room. The guests who had once been absorbed in their own lives, their own luxury, were now whispering in hushed tones. Their phones were already out, capturing the drama that had unfolded. The woman in the black dress, the one who had been disrespected by the elite, now was the one who had saved the day. The irony wasn't lost on her. She could hear their murmurs, the whispers of awe, the sudden respect in their voices. She's a doctor. She saved him. It was as if her identity had shifted in an instant. No longer just the woman who didn't belong. She was now the hero. And yet, even as the crowd's admiration grew, Quinn felt nothing but the weight of her own exhaustion. Will's family had not apologized yet, but their regret was there in the tremble of Evelyn's hands, the silence in Rachel's eyes. Still, Quinn knew better than to expect an apology in the midst of such a crisis. They would apologize later, but it would never be enough. The damage was done, and their words could never erase the cruelty they had shown. She stood in the doorway of the restaurant as the paramedics wheeled Will out, her gaze fixed on him. The realization that this was the end of their relationship, at least for her, settled deep within her chest. She couldn't go back to him. Not after tonight, not after everything that had happened, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. Quinn turned her attention back to the room, her focus shifting from Will's fragile form to the cold reality of her own heart. She had given him 3 years. She had given him everything, her love, her time, her commitment. But love, as she had come to understand it, wasn't just about being there when things were good. It was about standing up for one another, about fighting for each other even when it was hard. Will had failed her. His silence tonight had spoken louder than anything else. "Thank you, Doctor, Marshall," a voice broke through her thoughts, and Quinn turned to find Evelyn standing there, her voice shakier now. Her pride crumbled in the face of her son's collapse. We were wrong," Evelyn continued, her eyes brimming with a kind of fragile remorse. "You saved him. We owe you everything." "I'm sorry." Quinn didn't respond right away. She simply stood there, her arms crossed over her chest, her gaze unwavering. The apology wasn't for her. It wasn't even for Will. It was for the family, for their own pride. She could see it now. Evelyn was more concerned with preserving the Harper family image than with what she had done to Quinn. But Quinn was done with this dance. She wasn't interested in their hollow apologies or their broken words. Her gaze locked onto Evelyn's, and she spoke softly but firmly. "I didn't do it for you," she said, her voice cool and steady. "I did it because it's my duty as a doctor. Saving lives is my job, not a favor." The words hit Evelyn like a blow, and Quinn could see the woman recoil, her apology faltering in her throat. "Rachel."
Rachel stood behind her mother, her expression conflicted. The earlier smirk that had been so evident on her face was now replaced with wide eyes, filled with a mixture of shock and respect. "I'm not here for your thanks," Quinn continued, her eyes sweeping across the room, making sure everyone in the vicinity heard her words. "I'm here to save lives. That's what I do. And I did it for Will because I care about him. But that doesn't mean I'll forgive what's happened here tonight." There was a tense silence in the room. It was as if the very air had shifted. The guests, who had once been the source of Quinn's discomfort, were now observing her, some with admiration, others with newfound respect. It was an unsettling feeling, but Quinn didn't mind. This was her moment to be seen for what she truly was, a healer, not a woman who had to prove herself. With one final glance at the Harper family, Quinn turned away. She wasn't looking for closure, not from them. The door of the restaurant opened and the cold air of Seattle rushed in, a sharp contrast to the tension inside. Quinn stepped out into the night, her head held high, her heart still pounding, but resolute. She had done what was right. Now she had to move forward, no matter the cost. As she walked down the cobblestone path, her heels clicking with each step, Quinn didn't look back. She wasn't walking away from love. She was walking towards something greater, herself. She had always known that her purpose was bigger than any man, any family, or any judgment. She was meant to heal, to help, to make the world a better place, one life at a time. And as the Seattle skyline shimmered in the distance, Quinn knew that this was just the beginning of her journey.